Welcome everybody to another episode of Morelia Python Radio. This episode we're going to be reviewing for the book club Stolen World by Jeannie Aaron Smith. Eric is running a little late, so he has sent, supposedly he has sent a doctor and a lawyer to babysit me. So far, only the doctor has shown up, and this would be Mr. Drewlander. How are you?
I am the podfather now.
You're the podfather now, exactly. He said that, and now,
Okay.
unfortunately, because he said that, I don't have any recourse. He's the podfather now, so
it's legally binding.
Yeah,
I'm not a lawyer here. You can't say I'm wrong.
Without legal counsel, I have no argument.
That's right. That's right.
We're shot to pieces. But Eric wanted you and Rob to come on to talk about this book, Stolen World, because you guys had both read it and both have strong opinions of the book and enjoyed it. And also, same thing as me, where it was like you read a chapter and it's just like, well, that went poorly. Like it was that was kind of a downer. But
I think both Rob and I have met players in the book.
We
know some of the folks and met them and chatted with them and such. So I don't know.
And that's the thing is my reptile career started in the early 2000s. I mean, you weren't, I don't think you're that old, but I don't think you were totally into it. But yeah, I mean, you've met these people and stuff like that.
Well, yeah,
right?
I mean, the book starts before I was born. So
right, yeah, so that, yeah.
70s and, late 60s or whatever. So I was born in 75. So yeah, some of these events occurred when I was like a couple of years old or before I was born. So yeah, I mean, I'm not in it that long yet.
Okay.
So,
I'm not in it that long yet.
Yeah.
What's funny for Eric and I is that, the one of the main guys in the book was Hank Molt, and he was established in
right in
Pennsylvania,
backyard,
in our backyard, like all this stuff that they were talking about.
Yeah.
Where he had his original shop set up was Willow Grove and Hatboro. It was insane. Pennsylvania. Yeah, Willow Grove, Pennsylvania. It's and I'm like, yep, I know that place. Cool.
Yeah.
So it was really, really weird. But like I enjoy books like this because it does also show the community warts and all. Like this, as much as we want to get away from this stuff, this is our history. Like, and people are like, why don't people really like reptile keepers? Right here, this is why. Like it's all right here.
I would preface it and say there's some reptile keepers because I think there are some great pioneers in the hobby, and you guys have had some on the show, that are just cool people, and maybe they brought some stuff in that was rare and reproduced it, but they weren't out smuggling endangered species and willingly and willfully breaking laws. So
right. When you have to sit there and think about how you're not on the best situation if you have to build a false bottom into your shipping container. I mean, what I would say is that if you're starting to construct false bottoms and compartments in your crates, you're on the wrong side of something. Like if you have to do that, you've gone a little too far left.
Exactly. So, it was like they got greedy because they were getting the permits. I mean, they were maybe manipulating the system a little bit, but they got legal permits from the government of New Guinea to export Boelen's pythons. But they're like, no, I can't let these other
not that money like
go. I can't just take home 5. I got to take home 20.
And that was the thing. I think they had. You were exactly right. They had permits for 5 Boelen's pythons, and they managed to get 18 of them. Yeah. Plus 30 something other snakes, which include Bismarck ring pythons and a bunch of other stuff. And they brought them in. And this was the one story that I read it. And I'm like, that one broke Keith's heart because it was, they brought them in, they were seized, they were sent to the LA Zoo. And that was the other part is that I expected so much better of the zoological stuff. Like, I'm like, okay, they're at the zoo, whatever, they'll be fine. Yeah. They all died because
I'm sure this will work. This wormer will work.
This Disney wormer will work. Oh, they're all dead. It's like,
it's really, and that's, I mean, I think from what's the other, the Lizard King. That's another one. But that same kind of thing where even the good guys, who are trying to help the situation, investigate. I mean, they confiscate the animals and then they slowly die in their care too. Or and even like the zoos are getting into some of these. I mean, it was a black eye in the zoos, like the whole case with the plowshare tortoises and Baylor, like that was crazy too, where he's kind of instrumenting their transfer from Europe to New York, and it's like, oh my gosh, when they were supposed to go back to Madagascar and saying, oh, they're sick, they have to come to New York, we can fix them here.
Like, rather than going from Europe back to Madagascar, they have to fly across an ocean to New York to be taken care of. And then
exactly.
They get so butthurt about having to send them back, they carve the MEF into their shells.
Uh-huh.
Why would you do that? Like, I don't know.
I mean, I get that. Like, you see some of those idiot criminals that are like poaching species, like, with the twin spot rattlesnakes, that they paint the little part of their rattle, and then people are like popping up with these on Fauna or King Snake going, hey, I got some pricey eye to sell. They're captive bred and born. It's like, oh, how did they get my research tag on them, you moron?
Just the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
Stupid.
That one was my favorite. The MEF thing I thought was horrible, but if I was somebody who ran like a reptile zoo, I'd get those tortoises just because I'd have a plaque reading that entire story right next to their cage of like, well, what the hell's going on there? But the fact that the government set up several sting operations and we just kind of wandered into these, like, the herpetological people just wander into these pits without even thinking about it. Like, sell us all your rare and semi-illegal reptiles. Okay. And they're all the government. But the one where they go and collect the rattlesnakes and then they post it up on King Snake, and the researchers are like, well, that's my rattlesnake, and they were like, I don't understand how a rattlesnake has blue on its rattle. It's like it was nail polish. Like, are you kidding?
It's a genetic mutation.
No, it's like you have
for blue rattle.
For blue rattle. You couldn't get out of yourself. You couldn't get out of your own way to realize that's what was happening there. Come on, man.
I mean, I guess that's the good thing, is a lot of times these poachers or people who are doing things illegally make some pretty stupid mistakes and get
smart.
Caught.
I mean, they're not smart.
I guess that was the other thing, reading about Hank Molt, is he was so rarely successful in a monetary way, like he just never made any money off of these ventures, and he would screw over his partners and like just kind of sit around drinking beer while they were making the box or packing up stuff, it drives me crazy. It's crazy. I don't get it.
You and I were talking about that during the pre-show, where it's like what drove me up a wall is that they were successful. They have the animals here. They had the Fiji iguanas, they had diamond pythons, they had a bunch of other Australian species. And here comes CITES that's going to shut everything down. And rather than decide that now they're going to set up the animals that they have that are rare, that will now be illegal to come into the country, they're going to one more score, and they go around the world trying to get as much as they can crammed in there. And even then, even after Hank Molt was convicted, he still received packages from Australia of smuggled animals, of diamond pythons labeled as photographs and stuff like that. And art. And then the Woma pythons came in cassette cases. Baby hatchling Woma pythons. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, and that's what you gotta think about when all these people are hatching Womas right now, and there's like seems to be a big uptick in Woma pythons. I'm like, they came in little cassette tapes, and that was it.
Well, and I think that was kind of one of the few success stories out of this, is that the Womas did come in, and they came in through Crutchfield, right? Crutchfield brought in those.
Molt brought them in, and then Molt sold them to Crutchfield. Yep.
And then he sold them to a zoo, and then the zoo bred them and gave some of the offspring back to Crutchfield. So like that worked out, so they weren't having to go smuggle Womas, that kind of thing.
Well, and that was the thing, is that Molt became persona non grata after his conviction. But prior to, I'll say this, one of my favorite memories as a kid was going to Philadelphia Zoo. and they had fly river turtles. And they sat us down and they told us these fly river turtles were a gift from, or that their first fly river turtles were a gift from the, I think it was like the king of Indonesia or something like that.
Yeah.
And that they actually were used by an artist who came over and drew them, and then they were on the money and this, that, and the other thing. And reading about it, where it's like how Philly Zoo got their first fly river turtles is because Hank Molt gave them to them. And it was like, and they were legally imported. I'm like, oh no. Like, and it was just like
I don't know that
crushing a memory of young Owen. Like it was,
I don't know that I'd say he gave them to them.
Oh yeah, there was money exchange.
He didn't seem to do anything where he wasn't making money or So I guess
making that much.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I wanna go back and kind of like, I think that their drive, kind of came from reading the books and those kind of things, and back then, or watching the nature documentary back then, it was like these heroes of theirs were these safari guys who would go out and bring them back alive. I think that wasn't that one of the books.
We bring them back alive. It's like that was the one guy who was like who the AZA really kissed up to, and they said that, and he was like a prominent figure at the AZA meetings because he would go get the animals for them, because that's, this is back when zoos were like, we need a leopard, somebody go get one, and they drag it out of the wild, and that's
and then they tell a good story or write a book about that experience, and then these young impressionable Hank Moltz or Tom Crutchfields are reading these and seeing these guys in action and being like, that's what I want to do. I want to go out and find these rare reptiles that nobody's even heard about and bring them back and shove them in their face and say, look what I found. It seemed like it was more about the story to Hank,
the adventure,
the adventure and the story than the animals themselves. At that point, they just kind of became, okay, now I've done that. What's the next one? What's the next big thing? And I kind of took that as a little bit of a cautionary tale. Like, don't get caught up on the next thing. Like, enjoy what you have. Do something that helps you reinvigorate your enjoyment of what you already have, because there's always something else you could be doing. And, I guess maybe that's just my personality. I see a lot of people that get a project, have it for half a year, and then go, okay, what's the next one? They sell that, like they're talking you out of these amazing animals, like it's their favorite thing ever. And then a few months later,
it's
you're
gone.
Like, why are you selling it? Yeah. What's the deal here?
And I would say that's definitely something that happens more and more with the reptile community. It's like you get even with it, not necessarily just like species, but also with morph projects, you get the one morph, and then you're like, the next step is I need 3 more or this. It's like, well, that one isn't even grown up and bred yet. Like you just like you check next. It's like, and that, I think we in the community are very susceptible to that. I think you're exactly right. These guys were always chasing something, whether it was Bolinai, Fiji iguanas, Owen Pelly pythons, and Owen Pelly's had just been described, and they're like, we gotta get them. It's like, wait a minute, they just we just found out about these things. I mean, the plowshares, where it happened with the plowshares, it was like, nobody can have these, and they're like, the hell we can't. It's like, that's not like, because somebody told them they couldn't have it.
So I feel bad for those poor gecko guys that came out of the forest near the compound and got gunned down. Jesus, that was horrible.
Christ.
Gosh, yeah, that's not a fun position to be in.
No, it's like,
I mean,
herping.
that was a little rough, and they were probably on edge because they had been robbed before then, and so what do you do? But wrong place, wrong time, and the guy who jumps up to get his passport, like,
and then
guy, just stay on your belly.
Just lay down, man. Just let whatever's happening.
Run towards the cop. That's the moral of the story. Like,
oh God,
that's what a terrible story. How rough that would be, watching your buddy, his lungs outside of his chest cavity.
And that
messed up.
That's.
Yeah. Are we worried about spoilers on this?
No, I don't care.
If you haven't read the book, maybe push pause, go read it.
Please go read it. We're talking about the book, and we're obviously not going to go into everything, although we probably are at this point because it's just nuts. And
Yeah.
but I would I heartily recommend this book. It was actually a pretty easy read, and I blew through it. It was, and it was interesting too because it does appeal to my reptile thing and also my true crime thing. Where it's like, oh my god, you morons! Like
and it's talking about species we like, you know, so it's like even more enticing. Like the Lizard King, a lot about iguanas, a lot about iguanas. It's just masses
like,
of iguanas.
Dinosaur, got it.
And it's like, okay, you know, that's not as exciting as hearing about you know, Owen Pelly pythons potentially being shipped over to the U.S. or something. But then again, they would have wound up at Moltz. He would have sent them to.
They would have died there.
They would have died or something, you know, or they would have died in transit or whatever.
Right, and that's the thing, but that story is one of my favorites now that it's going to stick in my brain forever. Is because you are a convicted smuggler and you go to Australia to seal the deal to get Owen Pelly pythons, and you decide while you're there you're going to drop off a package of illegal animals to be sent to yourself, and you're surprised when the government has been tailing you this entire time. I mean, come on.
And that's what, well, the Owen Pelly thing was what cued me in. Hey, Rob, how's it going? Welcome to the podcast.
Yep.
I am your podfather.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Justin's the podfather now. He's
taken over.
Yeah. I don't know how to stop him, so that's just going to be the thing now, I guess.
Yeah. But the Owen Pelly thing was what kind of cued me in that Stefan Schwartz was a code name. It was not his real name. And I'm like, wait a second. I know the only person that's bred Owen Pellies that is, you know, publicly on record as doing so.
Oh, right. That's right. I know some of them were
his name.
I knew some of them were pseudonym. I didn't. Okay.
And unfortunately, that individual just recently passed away, like within this year.
Okay.
So, that's Peter Krause, and so he was the golden goose for Hank Molt.
God.
And that's the player that I was able to meet, you know, from the book. I was in Australia at a conference, and I saw Peter Krause. I'm like, that's Peter Krause. He bred Owen Pellies. He is the man, you know. So I kind of sidled up next to him, sat down next to him, and kind of tried to make conversation. And he was very like reserved and kind of just put me off and didn't want to get into a discussion. I think, you know, when you've gone through those kind of things, I think you're more reserved and you're less trusting of people for sure. But then the next time I saw him was after, I think maybe Peter Birch had kind of vouched for me and we kind of knew each other a little bit. And then he was very, very gracious and very open, and we had great conversations. He was a really great man. So yeah, he's definitely will be missed.
Yeah. And that's, you know, as much as this is kind of like the, it's just that's the coolest thing that you could, like, breeding Owen Pelly pythons would be something I would dream about right now. And he did it, and he had access to those things and all the other animals that he was sending over. It's like,
and then the Australian government confiscated his Owen Pellies, and they all died. You know, it's like even with the guy who's having success, you know, we'd be in a much better place today if they would have just left him with him, you know.
And that's the problem with this, is like that when the bad guys are killing the animals, and then when the good guys get the animals, they're killing them too. And it's like, so the animals don't win at all here. It's like, okay, cool. So, but yeah, it was a nuts book. Rob's here. So, Rob, what do you feel about this book, knowing that I know you've been in reptiles for a very long time and kept a lot of different species, some of these included in the book and stuff like that?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's a really cool book. It was something I was super excited when it came out. Humorously, and I said that I would tell this, my wife worked at a bookstore when that came out, and had access to it early, but was insistent that she would be fired if she brought it home early. It would be definitely found out and a problem. So sadly, I got it on Tuesday like everyone else, despite it being in the store for a week or whatever.
Oh man.
She wouldn't slide one out the door, like let it fall off a truck or something like that for you.
I know, right? What happened to it fell off the truck, you know?
Yeah. Just hey, you know,
Tiffany, come on.
It's a book about smuggling. You can smuggle it. It's fine.
Right? That's a great point. A book about smuggling. You can.
It expects to be smuggled. Like it's fine.
It's like a Hardy Boys book, right? You know, no, this one's about pirates.
The Smugglers of Pirates Go. It's about pirates.
Yeah, exactly. A man whose ivory supplies are low or high is less likely to hurt him than someone whose ivory supplies are low.
But Rob, we were talking. Justin and I were talking like how the one point that stood out to me was that these guys never set up or like bred the animals. Where it's like you have them, you did it. Like you got them into the country. Now breed them, and they just decided not to. They just kept trying to get more of them and just keep the cycle going. And it's weird because, and Justin said it's probably because we're in a different mindset than they were with our reptile keeping now than it was back then. I mean, you kind of think that kind of came across your head too, is that to set up the animals they had, or rather not?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? The whole book kind of raises. There's two different things about smuggling animals, right? And it goes, I think the line's even in the book, right? Where it's like, what's the first thing that happens when a new species is described? You know, 2 Germans buy a plane ticket. That, you know, that's sort of the idea, right? And if we look at it through that lens, usually though, that means to get a pair of animals, right? A small thing to start the project. And I think that's wholly different than sort of even the legalized mass export or slaughter and export. You know, for skins of like reticulated pythons, where you can legally kill. Well, I would say kill then skin, but in fact they skin then kill. You know, 130,000 of them legally a year, right? And I get you know, we're talking about different things in terms of maybe an island endemic of a tiny a live bearing gecko that has a single offspring per year or whatever, or heck, the Carusha, right? That are specifically talked about. That's sort of that context. And we can talk about or shingleback, and we can talk about it in that context of saying, you know, I imagine it, right? Like whenever someone complains that, oh, Carusha used to be inexpensive, and then, you know, now they're not available in that way, they'd have to actually be produced. And it's like, yeah, we were just outsourcing the cost of production to the environment, to the wild. That's why they were cheap. The effort, the expenditure to produce them was never low. They should never have been cheap. The only reason they was because we were exploiting a wild resource that had been built up over tens of thousands of years. That population was built up for tens of thousands of years, so there was thousands to harvest, right? But the impact that'll have long term is huge, because it took tens of thousands of years to do that. It's not as though the wild ones have 10 offspring, whereas the captives have 1. So, you know, I think. Go ahead, Justin.
Oh, along with that, you know, if there were environmental studies or something done where we understood their, you know, what kind of take would be tolerated, that kind of thing, you know, and I think kind of some of those studies have been done with like green tree pythons, you know, with Daniel Natouche, showing that, you know, the level of take is acceptable, and it's not decimating populations and things like that. You know, if there is some, and then a lot of times, like with Madagascar, it's just being burned to the ground. There's going to be no, and I think my favorite quote from the book that kind of goes along with that was, it said, reptile smuggling was an environmental pinprick next to the carnage wrought daily by mining, logging, and conversion of wilderness to farmland. Still, smuggling was something the agents could at least attempt to control. You know, it's a very minor thing, and I think they really like to overplay like how much money, you know, all this stuff is worth, and the you know, smuggling industry makes all this, you know, and it's just this black market evil. But really, it's just a tiny speck compared to all the environmental you know, carnage that's going on out there.
Well, and that's all to your point, right? That's all theoretical value. In the same way, actually, with if you go back to like the file sharing, with music and music and movies and things, and it's like when LimeWire and those sorts of things, and then the federal prosecutors will get up there and say they stole $15 billion worth of music when the industry itself was worth at that time like $5 billion a year. And it's like, yeah, if you had to actually pay for it, you wouldn't just be ripping everything that was there. Oh, I possibly would have an interest in this versus paying $18.99, retail or whatever. And it's like, so it's entirely fictive. Yeah, definitely. I think that stuff's silly, and it definitely highlights that. And I mean, heck, we've all seen it in Australia, right? The notion that all this stuff, you can't be the Germans with a pear, yet, I mean, how many shinglebacks get nailed on the road? How much of the land is, to your point, denuded, sold for mineral development to China, to make the phones we're talking on now, all this stuff, that's not an ethnic thing. That's just a development thing. Right. Yeah. Or, hey, we do that here, plenty, right? We were just in Southern California where obviously the habitat looks vastly different than it did 1,000 years ago, for sure.
Yeah.
And then there's also like, even then when it comes down to it, with the toads in Australia, it's like, so you're going to bar people from getting these animals, but the toads are going to sweep through here and decimate the population too. And it's I can see arguments on two sides.
100%. And I agree with you in this context. Maybe we should put a pin in this because maybe it's an entirely different conversation, but I've had some thoughts on the toads that were actually prompted by on the Aussie Herp podcast for the Christmas episode. Someone had recommended the Venom book associated with the development, the search for, collection and development of taipan anti-venom. And it's a really cool book, but one intriguing thing to me out of that book was actually a line in there from one of the youngsters who was committed to the cause and says, this is the early 50s from Victoria or New South Wales, I think from Victoria, and launches an expedition to Cairns. Turns out he didn't have to go nearly that far to go find a coastal taipan, but at the time, they were enigmatic. Even now, right? They're kind of enigmatic.
Yeah. Unless you're Shane Black.
Yeah,
100%.
You can find them real quick.
You can find them every day. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. No worries at all. But he talks about going to Cairns, arriving in Cairns, and on that first night seeing nothing but cane toads. And this is, as I say, 1952, 1953, and the place is overrun with cane toads. And so this prompted me, it sort of struck me as odd, right? Because we think of this as a really relatively recent problem. And when we're talking about how adapted are the inhabitants to this threat, right? Is this the principal threat, or is this now one of the sort of normative threats of that population? And caused me to do more research than I'd ever done previously into what was the history associated with releasing cane toads in the area. And it actually is from out by Atherton. I think so, maybe a little bit further north, but where they were doing the sugarcane stuff, and it was in 1935 through 1937. That means that when we were in Tully, right, in 2018, and looking at it and saying, man, there's nothing but toads, that's why there's no carpets. I mean, a carpet in Tully has to be 11 generations exposed to toads by now. So that's it's not that it's good for them. It's not that it's not a problem, but how much of a problem it is, I think maybe our minds are a little bit different. Obviously as they expand into new territory, that's a little bit different. And we sort of, at least I conceived of them as like, they're born and they all have their little hobo sticks and say, move west, we need to expand our range. And we also know that's not really what they're looking to do either. So I don't know. It just stepped on a hornet's nest I've been thinking about there, Owen.
No, it's fine. I appreciate the hornet's nest.
And these animals that have been exposed to them for almost a century now are learning to avoid them, or recognizing they're not food, or flipping them over and eating their belly, the non-poisonous part. So they're adapting and I I thought it was really interesting. So a lot of the research that, Shine's kind of done, he's done a lot of research on toads recently and shown that a lot of populations like the fly river turtles or the children's pythons have actually increased in their populations because their major predators have eaten toads and died. They don't have any want to eat the toads, and so they're not being affected that way unless they're like eaten as a hatchling or something. But so they're actually benefiting from the toads because their predators are getting knocked out, the crocodiles or the goannas or whatever. So
and it's in a similar way, complex, right? Well, as ever, right? The cosmic octopus. It's exactly. The complexity exceeds our capacity to understand it. But the other part of that, right, is just that change, can favor some things, right? I think of it with blood pythons, right? Palm oil in Sumatra is really great for blood pythons. They're doubtless more dense than ever.
Devastating everything else, but yes,
100%, 100%.
And that's, we're thinking about the cane toads in relation to jungle carpet. It's probably the agriculture that's knocking the jungle carpets out.
And that's exactly what it made me think, right?
Or improving them. Yeah. Or helping them.
Are they the threat or just a threat in the panoply of options, right, that are having this impact?
Or a benefit.
Or possibly, again, complexity, right?
It's got to vary per species.
Nothing's that simple.
Yeah, it can't be.
And I guess that's half of me is like I see Tom Crutchfield's logic when he says what is conservation through propagation.
It was
where you're like, I mean, if they're burning
commercialization,
down the country,
right? Conservation through commercialization.
Yeah. So if you're and we've seen this with a number of Australian species. Nobody's gonna try to smuggle out a bearded dragon or a thick-tailed gecko or something.
Not worth it.
Or, whatever. But so the and to the contrary, a lot of Australians are smuggling in morphs of bearded dragons or morphs of different things, And so, I guess that's kind of a two-way street, but, there's no need to smuggle in a lot of these species that we have in the US. And so, when the customs officers are like, don't pretend like you don't know how much they're worth. I'm like, well, yeah, my livelihood's worth a lot more than a $5,000 lizard. I can still buy it in America and not risk my whole livelihood in jail time. I'm not stupid.
I would like to not get arrested.
Yeah.
There you go.
I'm not that greedy that I'm going to risk everything. I'm not a gambler. So that's kind of but I can see like that frustration, I guess, or that okay, they don't care about the wildlife. Why should I care about their laws revolving around the wildlife? And, some kind of things were manipulated, like saying that they ate the banded iguanas or whatever in Fiji.
They eat the Fiji iguanas. No, they don't.
But they do eat the radiated tortoises, and they had that bust where they found 10,000 radiated tortoises in a shack and what are they going to do with those? If they just flooded the pet trade market with 10,000 radiated tortoises, anybody who ever wanted a radiated tortoise would have one, and then be like, okay, now we don't need to worry about smuggling those or doing these.
I mean, there's a reason they're not smuggling in sulcata tortoises, right?
Yeah,
because they get huge, and also they have tons of babies, and there's a bunch of other stuff like that. So if you wanted a sulcata, you could probably get one in the U.S. for pretty cheap. So I see the draw to that of being like, if you said flood the market, have radiated tortoises all over the place here, and you won't have that problem anymore. You won't have to worry about smuggling. And I see that a lot and that's the problem with this book too, is that because the species that we're pretty much interested in are in a place where we can't get them, it's like, because it's blocked off to us. It's like,
it makes them more desirable.
It does. It does. And it's like, and the one guy who got pat down at the airport and he had the diamond python, and it was like moving.
That's just my moving tumor.
That's my moving tumor. It's fine.
Don't touch that.
Excuse me, sir. But it's it's like you see that in everybody, anybody who's interested in Australian animals at one point is like, yeah, I'd consider smuggling that, but you don't mean it. Like it's that thing where it's I'd smuggle that thing, or I'd get a boat and go to Indo and ship it from there. It's like, no, you don't actually do it, but these are guys who actually attempted it. They were horribly not successful in a lot of cases, and
Well, I would posit that they actually were, for the most part, very successful, but you only find out about it when it goes badly, right? And that's sort of,
all right, yeah, okay.
Certainly, I mean, if we look at, and some of this stuff, it becomes this gray market, right, where there are then legal shipments associated with stuff from Sweden, and it's like people want to get into a discourse about, a certain person with Bredl's pythons or pygmy pythons or whatever, but those were also then sent, through legal means as well. So is that to say that all of them were, or none of them were, or that entire thing is fictive? Like, who's to say, right?
Right.
Well, there are a couple people who could say, and they mostly don't. But
like, will they?
In reality, when you have a bunch of people captive breeding them, then it becomes a moot point because they're not impacting the natural. They're actually helping the natural cycle because you're not pulling stuff out of the wild. You're just shipping stuff around the world that's been captive bred. So,
well, and that was things. They had pockets of captive. They had colonies of Fiji iguanas that were in zoos and in certain other places, and they still kept bringing them in after they had become.
Well, that's just a question of access, then. Like part of that. Is because those have always been just sort of the things that are always the most difficult for that, right? Are then things that just have a stigma for a long time. Right, Prasinus, the Varanus prasinus, the emerald tree monitors, right, weren't allowed to be exported just because they sort of had they were perceived as such a precious thing, right? It wasn't even a question of what's the science say. To your point about Daniel, right, and the biochondros and sustainable harvest and things, there are things that are just, it doesn't matter what the actual populations look like. It's just a hard no because we perceive that as being sort of this idyllic critter, in this sense. And so that was the case with Indonesia for those Prasinus for a long time. And ultimately then that led to a change, and that probably was at least partially associated with the, finding all the different forms, the misul, the blue ones, all the different island insular forms that have the different looks, and because it kind of coincided with that time frame that there seemed to be a shift in the way that was handled. But sometimes it's just the idea, you're not, why do zoos not have pandas? Well, because China regulates the heck out of pandas. Is it because of their actual
rent them out, right?
The Chinese 100%. Government owns every panda in the world, and but
it's because of the human conception of the panda, not actual rarity. I mean, to that point, right? The Bacari, the black tree monitors in the wild, seem to be more rare than Prasinus. But at that they're on the Aru, archipelago, and it was for a long time. Bacari were coming in huge numbers, despite the fact they had a more restricted range, and there were fewer of those in the wild. But those ones, that's fine. It's just a black one. Who cares about that?
It's not the green one. Get it out of here.
That's a pretty green one.
Well, it's almost like you kind of wish that certain government entities. I know it's going to break down to money. It's like for hunters in a hunting season, they have like bag limits. They have what can be removed from the population, sustain the population, and they have those numbers figured out, and like fisheries and this, that, and the other thing. But nobody really looks at it from the sense of what can be removed from the wild as part of like collections or reptile this or this, that, and the other thing. And,
I think they do, but not in the refined way that you're talking. Not with that level of granularity and detail, right? It's not normative enough that they're putting those resources in that they put in for fishing or associated with, these other things, so that it's most commonly it'll be there's an allowable list, and if on the and it varies by local jurisdiction and all, but just to speak in generalities, it'll be you can't do it at all unless it's on this allowable list, and then on the allowable list you can have up to X, you can collect up to X, and it's going to be these handful of things. The other things, it's just a flat no. And that's the way it goes. When in reality, maybe the answer is 2 would be, but the enforcement associated with not only is it the granularity to discover those things, it's then the ability to enforce it and sort of make sure that people aren't exploiting it. Because all three of us, we're talking about this in the German context, right? Where we're saying what's one pair or 2 pair. obviously, less so in this book, more so in The Lizard King, we get into a context of saying, well, why not bring 50,000 and sell green iguanas for $10 rather than bringing in 5,000 and selling them for 50, or whatever. That's that sort of, when we talk about commercialization, there's boutique commercialization, which I think is, what we're all talking about here and sort of envisioning. But then there's also just the gross, like gross consumptive factory. That's
Rape
just
and
like
pillage.
100%. And I don't think any of us are for that, so that even there, it's like, well, how, even as we're talking through it, it's really difficult to kind of thread that needle of saying what we're talking about, that's fine. This enforcing it so that it doesn't become that other thing that we know exists by people, Justin, I think it was you that would always reference, and certainly Owen, I know you love the line about like, it was money with scales, right? Not actually the animal for itself.
Well, what kills me too, and we were talking about this on Reptile Fight Club, that'll come out later, but we're talking about the new the fine in Florida for filling in a gopher tortoise burrow with cement is less than doing the environmental impact or whatever to remove the tortoise. It costs you less to just fill in the burrow with and kill it and get fined for killing a tortoise. It makes no sense, but of course you can't go near a tortoise or touch a tortoise or forbid you keep a tortoise, but that's kind of the disconnect, I think, where we're willing to pave over their habitat. And I face the same thing in Utah with Gila monsters. There's a very small range of the Gila monsters in the southwest corner of the state, and you're not allowed to, own one or keep one or whatever. Now, these have made it in the pet trade, so they're, any other state can probably buy a Utah Gila monster, except people in Utah, where they come from, and where we could keep them in a area where they feel comfortable or whatnot. And but yet St. George, where they're found, is one of the fastest growing cities in per capita in the United States. It's just ridiculous, the amount of growth. And I was talking about going into this state park, and there was this long road you had to take to get out there. And now it's just all houses, houses and condos right up to the doorstep of the state park, And so luckily they've set aside land to kind of as a preserve, and it's a good section and good amount of land, but who knows how long that'll last. I mean, the government of Utah has really shown their true colors of wanting to sell off all the, get the federal land so they can sell them off and make money, and it's like, to what end? You see, you'll make a buck now, but down the road, then it's gone. Then that person's just, on the land or what, I don't know. It's just frustrating to think of that.
It is. And it's also, I mean, you kind of get the reputation of being the reptile person in your town. So there's a small park near me, and the head of the Parks and Recreation texted me saying that they had reports of a rattlesnake down at the park. And I said, that is highly unlikely, just highly unlikely. All over Facebook the next day was that there was a large black rattlesnake at the park, and that it was unsafe, and people did this, and people were getting ready to go down there with shovels and stuff like that and find this thing. And I'm like, did anybody get a picture of it? It was a black rat snake. It was just a black rat snake. But this is an animal that encroached on human territory. So what you're saying, like even with the area in Utah, you could build all around where the Gila monsters are. The second that Gila monster comes off of where it's supposed to be, someone's going to freak out. Kill it. It's a venomous animal. It's near my children. It threatened my dog that was 18 times its size. Like, it's that kind of stuff. So you see that edge of it and that part of it where it's like, well, why the hell can't I have this? I would appreciate it much more than this person that's going to kill it with a screwdriver. But it's also...
It really is like The Simpsons. It's just one step divorced. It's like The Simpsons, right? Where for liability purposes, it's the ocean that will kill you, not us, right? In terms of we'll destroy your habitat. Will it inexorably lead to your death? Yes. But for liability purposes, it wasn't actually the backhoe. It was the impact of the development of the backhoe.
Right. And I did read that article you were talking about, Justin, where it is now cheaper for them just to pay the fine than to pay to have the tortoises removed. which is just stupid.
And that really, I think, drives some of these things where you're like, they don't care about the wildlife. They're not really trying to protect the wildlife. They're trying to make themselves feel better or give themselves job security or something. It's like, I guarantee there's wildlife officials out there that really care about wildlife, and some might even care about reptiles, but it's just frustrating to watch just the wanton destruction. And they probably feel the same way, about the destruction of the habitat and those kind of things, because they're probably interested in maintaining those wild areas as well. It's just, I guess it's hard to stop progress. And there's a lot of what was it? There was some mining going on in Utah on public lands, and the money that they made was tenfold the amount of the fine they had to pay for mining on land that they shouldn't be mining on. It's like, what was the point of that? Deterrent here, it's like, I guess it was kind of the early days of smuggling. When you'd get caught, you just kind of get slapped on the wrist and say, don't do that again. And then, or fined $5,000 when you made, $50,000 off of the smuggled animals. So what's the deterrent? You're going to just turn around and do it again. And that's why we see a lot of repeat offenders, and why Hank Molt kept going for the next score and the next score. And, why Tom Crutchfield couldn't just call the authorities when he got the banded iguanas in the mail and things like that.
I don't understand his thinking of trying to send them to, well, actually, I do understand his thinking of sending them to the zoo. It's like, they'll just go over there and join their population and be legal. But it's,
we're seeing from Europeans that banded iguanas are very easy to breed, and they're very prolific, and they're, you can just wind up with anybody who wants one can get one for $100, but yet they're
even in Canada, Canada too. But it'll never happen here because of this, because of their intrinsic appeal, right? Combined with this history, that's something that'll never. The facts don't matter. We're divorced from the facts. Those will never be in private, legitimately.
Unless
well, but I'm saying the mentality associated with that history is just always going to be a hard no.
Yeah, that's
because it's driven by this. It could be anything else. It could be something far more rare, but it doesn't have the stigma, that association, because that would be the thing, right? You could view that through, people even generationally, right, can be petty on such things. And if ultimately that were to happen, then it would be easy enough to conceive someone viewing that as a spit in the face to all the people that were doing the enforcement in 1979, 1980,
Sure.
Saying, actually,
rough scale pythons are in private hands. Rough scale pythons are in private hands before Fiji iguanas trickled out of zoological facilities in the United States, where if they're set up, apparently they breed like crazy. To the point where I think there's several zoos that have large colonies of Fijis. So the fact that those animals can be collected in Australia, do their little dance all over Europe, and somehow get over to us, before the other stuff that's already here can get into our hands.
Well, there's no dance, Owen. No. Hold on. I will stop you here.
No. Sorry, no.
We don't need to. This is the thing, right? The whole notion that things have never been legally exported. Well, there was a period of time when things were shipped out before there was a law on this. Right. So you can say, oh, well, it wasn't legal because we didn't stamp a permit because you didn't require one. Okay, that's a little bit fictive as just talking through it. Right. But in terms of certainly roughies, albino olives, Darwin carpets, I mean, those have cleared paperwork that says those are legitimate. In fact, there's cleared paperwork that says shinglebacks are here. The zoo had some where it's like, did you sign off on this, 3177 import paperwork that said, call up Fish and Wildlife? Did you sign this paperwork? Says these came in legally for, these purposes? 100%. Okay, we're good to go.
Never let logic and reason get in the way of bureaucracy and politics, because I tried that. I had paperwork stamped and they said, well, those aren't legal. And I said, what does your stamp mean if not legality of specimens? Like, I'm importing them through proper channels from Europe. You stamped it. It came to me. How is that not legal? I thought that was the definition of legal. Oh, no. We can't determine how this will impact populations in Australia. They will not. There is no chance that they would impact populations in Australia.
How would they get there?
They've been here and they've been reproduced and there's babies and man, never let logic and reason get in the way of bureaucracy.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's a common problem to any sort of bureaucracy, as you highlight, right? I'm just highlighting here that, Owen, it's way overstated when people say, oh, everything was smuggled. No. Yeah, sure, a lot of stuff. No, and maybe there's a lot of stuff in the mix, right, that where that might be true. But the notion that all of it is, which you hear just, like Justin, it's the tweak on what you just said, right? Don't let the facts get in the way of a good story, and people tend to take it that way. It's all illegal.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard stories of pairs of parentes that were shipped, smuggled over within the last 10 years or whatever, and they were in private hands over here somewhere. I don't know who got them or who sent them or whatever, but people telling me I know because I talked to the person who sent them over, kind of one of those I heard it from this guy, heard it from this guy kind of things. But there's plenty of those kind of animals that have made it over, but what do you do with them then? If they're they're like, so what if you got some of these banded iguanas back when they were illegal, like Crutchfield, what do you do with them?
Right.
Yeah, you can't do anything because they're so they're so known and just too hot. Yeah. You can't make any money off them because nobody's going to buy them from
you. And you don't even get to have the Instagram glory of putting them out there because then you're giving yourself away. It's like it would ruin the whole thing.
Right? Yeah. It would have to be a pure, I love these animals and I just want to see them for myself. And very few herpers have that kind of fortitude.
Yeah, I don't think they I think even if you
just got to tell somebody.
Exactly. Even if you're the kind of person to keep a secret from the mass population, you'd still invite several people over who are big reptile nerds and show them off downstairs. And that's why the Fed set up several reptile import-export companies and easily caught people. Just
Well, and even then, right? I mean, it has to be a lucky guess that you wind up liking them at least in captivity. I mean, you can love something in the wild, like if something has been unavailable, you're the first person who gets, you get these illicit animals. Well, hopefully they're just as cool as you hoped they were. Then you're just sitting on this thing that, to your point, well, the only glory is the intrinsic glory, right? The intrinsic enjoyment. And what if you don't enjoy them? Then it's all for naught.
Then what? Yeah.
Or what if and that's kind of you can't go looking for help.
It was in the book. Somebody's like, after all, they're just iguanas. Like they got bored with them or they didn't care about them or whatever, and it's like this thing they had to have. And they were, the stories are all glorified. And then after they have them and they've seen a few of them, it's like, they're just iguanas.
It was about getting them. It's like, the hunt. It's that mentality. It's the chase. It's you can't have it.
Yeah.
I mean, shoot, we see this all the time. Yeah. We've seen this all the time throughout the entirety of our collective experiences in herpetoculture. There are plenty of awesome animals that are readily available and are inexpensive to free that we don't value. Like we do things that are hard to hard to keep or hard to access or all all of the above
until they go away.
And then the price shoots up. And sometimes that's due to reality, right? Karusha. Other times it's just a function that actually it turns out people don't really enjoy working with them. But now it's the rare, cool thing, or the opposite. There are plenty of, in our California experience, right? The rock lizards, right? Where it's like, well, that's not a commercialized species at this point. Could be theoretically, but it might well be in that vein of can collect but can only give away. I think maybe the California license doesn't allow the sale of the, that sort of thing. But it's like, heck, that doesn't mean people can't and won't do it. I have several projects where that's the case, where people have kept them going for decades without being able to sell them.
Yeah. Well, and also that's just if you live in California, like the Utah Gila monsters, if you collect them legally and move them out of the state and you're selling them to, Utah can't go and grab somebody in Colorado and say you're selling Utah Gila monsters.
Well, theoretically they might. it's interesting, actually, legally speaking.
There's gray
But
areas.
but I agree with you in
that's
terms
true.
of who's the guy who's up in Montana, right? I mean, he's got those beautiful Utah line Gilas, right, and has been selling them publicly that way for 35 years. It's he used to do some king snakes, but he's got Arizona. He's got reticulated, but he also has the beautiful Utah line. What Washington County? I can't think. He used to do a big spread in the reptile magazines.
It's not
Steve
Osborne, is it?
There you go.
Steve Osborne. Yeah, that's I guess that's the frustration is, a lot of things are state laws or state rules, and I mean, California king snakes were technically illegal in Utah until a few years back when they changed that, because I mean, every pet store had a California king snake, and half the people who had a king snake had a cow king. It's like, but technically they're illegal. Are you going to go arrest these kids because they bought a king snake at PetSmart? No, I don't think that's going to happen. So they kind of changed it to, you couldn't collect them, but you could buy them from a pet store or whatever. So
state laws are weird, and I kind of went through a lot of the state laws in my head when reading the book about the various complications they kept running into. Because I mean, the reason I breed snow corn snakes is because I do have a pet store I supply in New Jersey, and they can only purchase corn snakes that have
a mutation,
mutated eyes. So if they have the black eyes, they even if it's a morph, like the rest of the snake could look crazy, but if it's got black eyes, they can't have it. They can only do red eyes or some other different colored eyeball. So that's just the kind of weird stuff that we deal with, because I think it's like one part of New Jersey where there could be corn snakes or something like that.
We've been there, Owen.
It's just
we've been there. We went and looked for them. Yeah? We did not succeed.
We didn't find shit.
We found a few things.
Well, we found ticks.
It actually wasn't the tick spot. It was the slightly less ticky spot.
Oh. Okay. It was the other non-ticky spot. But it's
not non-ticky. I don't understand how you people live there. Not non-ticky. There is no non-ticky, east of the Mississippi. That's not a thing.
Thank goodness we live west then.
New Jersey is horrible. Yes, Rob.
Ticks are terrible.
But it's hard to put value on these things, and I understand that, like, once the cat's out of the bag, what were they talking about in the book? How, like, they keep having the ads of, like, don't smuggle tortoises, and it's like a baby plowshare and a baby it was like they said it was like a radiator or something like that. And it was like, don't smuggle baby tortoises. And they're like, at this point, they're everywhere. Like, they've just been, those ones that were never recovered have just been bred all over the place. It's like,
I hope so. I hope
that's what happened. Yeah, me too.
I have a soft spot for people. So I have a friend that got caught smuggling, right? And he was bringing back stuff to pair up, and he would come up with these rare species of lizard from Australia and be like, all of a sudden he's offering offspring. You're like, where'd you get these? Oh, they got them from Europe or whatever. Yeah. Well, it turns out he, a lot of them didn't come from Europe, maybe, and but he would bring them back, reproduce them, and then sell captive bred offspring, and make it so nobody ever needed to bring those things in ever again, so and I mean, he got caught, and he was dobbed in by one of his ex-wife, kind of alerted his competitor, and they called the airport and told him what airline and where they'd find him. And so I think that was kind of a theme of the book too, of, you're not really safe when you're dealing with people who are going to help you smuggle. Hank Molt was terrible of just screwing people over, turning in his friends, just to get his sentence lessened a little bit. And he felt fully justified in doing that, that's what you do. That's what happens when you deal with this kind of, I mean, he had no qualms about, like, not sending people animals and taking their money and just kind of hiding from them at the expo. It's
right.
How do you live like that? That would just be such a miserable existence. Watching, having to look over your shoulder because somebody's going to attack you because you owe them money or you stole their animals, or
taking people on world tours to look for animals and on their dime, and then they're broke coming around looking for you because now you've taken the animals that they helped you collect, and you've sold them all.
And then you just hang them up to dry,
right?
Once you're busted.
And also, I mean, I would say another important lesson for that we learned from Tom Crutchfield with the Fijis: destroy the evidence. Just destroy the evidence completely.
Don't let your smuggling buddy
Hank, you'll take care of this
for you. Yeah, I'm
prison.
sure this will never come back to haunt me.
I'm sure this will work out fine. Yeah. Close his door. Like, it's like I mean, burn the carcasses, spread the asses into the ocean. Like, don't. What's wrong with you, man?
But I get it. I wouldn't be able to do that, you know, if I had some, species that I was prancing around the reptile room,
happy with the little
happy to have them, and then I can't just, you know.
And I think that's also the
cut
part
off their heads and kill their lizards as well.
Right. I want to say that was some part of it too, where it's like, again, you know, we talked about it, where it's like the good guys get them, the animals die. The bad guys get them, the animals die. Even then, it's like the Pine Barrens with the suitcase, where they freaked out and they buried it, and then the animals passed. It's like, God damn it, just give the suitcase to like the authorities. Let them take care of it. Don't let the animals die. And it's
they almost certainly would have died. Anyway. I don't think that's worth giving tears over.
I want to sit there and cling to that. Exactly. It's like with the 18 bull and I, where it's like, well, they're at the LA Zoo now. They'll be safe, and then they're dead. It's like, no. There's also that. It's that you need to get yourself out of that head of just because they're now with the proper authorities or with the zoological facility, they'll be okay. Zoos had to come a long way in this book.
Well, I don't know that they've. They still got a little ways because my buddy that got caught, they confiscated the animals and sent them to a very renowned zoo, and we went to that zoo to see those animals, and they actually showed us the animals, but we saw some of them that were on exhibit. Yeah. And these hadn't been split into different species yet, but anybody who'd worked with them or knew anything about them knew they were different species. Well, the zoo had them all in one cage, and they were all like kind of in their own corner, like, and they had like battle wounds and stuff. And it's like, okay, you need to separate these. Don't keep them all in the same tank. Well, no, they're all the same species. They're fine. No, they're not fine. And we're trying to tell them you need to separate these, but they wouldn't listen, you know. And then we see it's just so frustrating, you know, the shenanigans.
There's a really big wedge and a disconnect between herpetoculture, like hobbyists, and zoological. And you almost feel like this is where some of it kind of came about, is that a lot of zoos got embarrassed by the stuff that happened with Hank and things like that, of when it all came out that they had purchased smuggled animals and this other thing, which, I mean, the 70s and zoos, and I mean, like, you know, this might have been a step above what they would normally do, is just go over there and buy the animal and have it come over with the legal paperwork, which I think a zoological facility would be able to get such paperwork. And they actually did send Molt on a couple collection trips with paperwork. It's just like he had, like we were talking about earlier, where it's like, yes, a lot of this stuff came legally, and the paperwork said 5, but they put a 1 in front of the 5, and now instead of 5 bolins, it's 15. It's like that kind of stuff.
And some of it is constructive knowledge too, right? If you're going back to the zoo stuff, where it's like, you know, fine, you may not have known, but you should have known. A reasonable person similarly situated would have known. Right?
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, 100%. I think, Owen, you make a bunch of great points there, and a lot of I mean, so much of the book, right, is about human foible rather than the animal. You know, I really enjoy it. It's my favorite sort of the pop fiction that involves the herpetoculture more so than the Lizard King and all this stuff. But not least, and we can get into this down the road, but like and I know, Justin, you'll be the same, Owen, you'll be the same, but there are things in here that I have direct firsthand knowledge of, right? And, you know, incidents, even when it's talking about the 2003, 2004, you know, being at Daytona, the hurricane, the year with Butterbean, the giant German who winds up who becomes obsessed with Parviacula. Yeah, I can tell you a lot about what he's like, because I was sitting on that patio and I was chatting with him. So I can tell you all about him. No worries at all, man. You know, so
Yeah. I think before you got on, we were talking about
Thomas
Stefan
Price.
Schwartz.
Oh,
Yes,
Peter
Krause.
Stefan Schwartz is Peter Krause. Benjamin Bucks is Thomas Price, associated with the Euromastic. So and a guy who was keeping some marine iguanas. If you can find him, he's on Facebook. I think I'm friends with him on Facebook, maybe Facebook or Instagram or something. But he was working on a marine iguana project, and very cool. But I think, to your point, there was there's 3 or 4 pseudonyms. And I had written them in the book, sort of as I had sussed it out, years ago or whatever. But to your point, Stefan Schwartz, pretty clear. Benjamin Bucks, Thomas Price, and then Carl Sorensen is a guy with the last name Christensen. So some PA guy with the last name Christensen, but I don't know first name. But super fun.
That was kind of fun to come to that realization when you're reading and you're like, wait, you read Owen Pelly's? Wait, I know who that is. That's not Stefan Schwartz.
100%. Hey, I'm just going to go consult my Blue Bible and look at the photos of exactly what's being described here.
Yeah. Oh, look at that. It's funny because I know in the later part chapters, they get into the Ethiopian vipers, and it's just like, Hamburg Reptile Show. God damn it again. Like every time there's something horrible about animals and reptiles, it's like, here we are in Pennsylvania.
Well, I think when the author, so I have a couple, very much on brand or on book comments here, possibly on brand as well, but would be that I think when she was talking to Hank, either Hank or oh shoot, I can't. Who's the guy who runs the Daytona show? Somehow it's slipping my mind. Wayne Hill, yeah.
Wayne.
Mr. Scooter himself. So she was either talking to Hank or talking to Wayne, but I think it was Hank, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I mean this is all fine, all right, but you got to come to Hamburg because that's where the real fun's at." That's the good stuff.
You can sell a kid a black mamba,
crocodile, and a black dam. Oh, here's your first trip to Hamburg. Here's your complimentary crocodile and venomous snake. Thank you. Goodbye. Please come back. It's like, I want to say I was watching some documentary on exotic animals as pets, and it's one of those where they're filming as they're driving, and I'm like, that looks familiar. And then it has like the little ticker of where they are, and it's like Hamburg, Pennsylvania. I'm like, crap. Like there's a 50-50 chance that I'm going to be in this thing in a minute. Like it's like,
well, I gotta bounce. My daughter has a band concert, so I'm going to go listen to her play. But I now transfer my Podfather powers over to Rob.
Okay, that's smart.
You're the Podfather now.
Yeah, that's intelligent. That's how I would have played it too.
Yeah. But what a crazy book. This is probably one of my favorite.
So I will say, Justin,
books,
the one note, because I really want your feedback on this too. The one thing I guess that strikes, because I'm totally with you, totally agree. The one thing that strikes me the wrong way is I think it's probably in the introduction. There's just sort of some negative pandering language about like weirdos who keep reptiles and all this stuff, and it's like, Jenny Aaron Smith, your entire audience, your principal audience for this book is reptile keepers. Like, know your audience.
Yeah. I actually talked to Terry Phillip. Terry Phillip, who had met her and knew her to some extent. He said she's really on the ball. She's really, she has a pretty good understanding of.
It felt like an editor's note. It almost felt like, to your point,
don't know,
like it didn't correspond to the language of the book. It almost felt like you didn't write this, or you were suggested to. This is framing from an external editor, because it doesn't correspond with how you write about the events in this book, and it's really negative and really just sort of silly, because again, it's like, no, I understand that you're trying to mass market a book, but your principal audience is going to be people that you're going to be offending with this language. It's like, it's not going to land right, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I remember when the book was released, and
well, he was excited. Hold on,
Crutchfield
remember, he was excited
mind.
for it.
He was trying
and
to
then
slander
so we're into our week before, and then Tuesday, and this sort of. If I had gotten it the week before, maybe I would have known he was going to be upset beforehand. Although, frankly, he comes. I think he's fine. I think that's just to me, that's the vanity of ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he's bounced
There's
back.
nothing in here that isn't.
There's nothing in here
I
that's
think
not
it's
true.
just the vanity of always viewing ourselves as the hero, and maybe that's why he was upset more than any factual statement.
Right. Yeah.
But it was fun to watch him.
It was funny. I do remember all that. Yeah, it was very funny.
And freak out about it. And,
All right, Justin.
All right, guys.
All right, Justin.
Have fun. Well, thanks for letting me jump on here. It's fun to talk about the book, but we'll catch you later.
Yep. So, I mean, speaking to that point, is you can't be the hero if you take your entire family and run to police. Like, I don't think you can be just based off of that.
That I mean, it's interesting, right? I mean, you can be the hero that's described, or at least one of two heroes, right? Anti-heroes. I mean, that's the thing. It sort of gives this, it fits well into like a narrative of dystopian 20th century fiction, right? Where we're kind of looking at this thinking, okay, this is our Saul Bellow seize the day sort of characters who are sitting there saying, okay, this is the prototype anti-hero within probably the broader group of just a plain villain, and something more of a hero within a more narrow framework. So yeah, I don't know. I just, to Justin's point, right, that definitely was how it went over, or at least how he reacted to it. And I can't imagine that it was actually based on the substance of the book. It was just that there's a kind of some stuff in there that maybe is a little too on the nose, right? I mean, I think he's theoretically from like a long-standing Florida family and all this stuff, but it's like I think she has a line in there about, well, certainly the wealth and prestige were long gone by the time that his mother put Tommy Crutchfield on the birth certificate. The notion, he's a 17th century Floridian and all this stuff, and it's like, well, all the wealth and prestige that might have been there at one point were gone when that happened. Well, he probably didn't love that line, even if that's something that he says. Well, even if it's something he says sort of in self-deprecation or in, in a certain mindset or state or whatever it would be, right? When you see it written down, it seems maybe it's a little bit uglier than what you imagine it to be when you say it, and I think it's probably those things that he really disagreed with.
Well, and if it comes out,
it lands differently, especially to you. It might not to anyone else, but to you, it really lands different.
Yeah. Right. It's just weird with this.
Well,
book.
I mean, it's weird for you because it's. I mean, all this stuff is you weren't necessarily born, let alone involved, at the time. But it's all happening within. I mean, I had to ask Eric. It's like, what's the Balakinwood, right? It's always from, and it's like, it's like, how the hell do you say that? And it's Welsh, right? But it's like, if you're not a part of that, you look at it, it's like, like you wouldn't know how to say it, right? So that's super interesting.
It's like how Schuylkill, it's super interesting in my standpoint. Is like when they were describing where his shop was in Willow Grove. I know that place. I know exactly where they were talking about. Having lived a block away from Martin's Aquarium, and I ran around Willow Grove as a kid most of my life, so it's weird to have those ties, and then also having ties to zoological facilities, and also having ties to animals that I would only dream about. Like, we're talking right out of the wild diamond pythons. Yeah. We're in Willow Grove, Pennsylvania. And, like, come on. And I talked about this a little bit with Justin. I did not start my reptile career until 2005. So this is a part of our history that, I never
you hear about it in bits and spurts. It'll be referenced,
by, right. the history of it. You can't have Australian species and not have a little bit of the knowledge of how some of them got here, and how some of them had to do that. Womas being smuggled in tape decks blew my freaking head
there's
off.
actually, did you take note, Owen? There's a shipping technique that's mentioned in there, right? So that Stefan Schwartz, Peter Krause, right, talks about the importance of letting something crawl into its container rather than forcing it in. Yeah, letting it crawl in and settle. And it's like, okay, everyone should take that as a note when they're shipping a reptile.
Yeah. Let it slither into the bag and figure itself out, and then you can seal it up. I like that idea better than, cramming as many of them as you can into a box, sealing it, and then hoping to God everybody.
You had to be a little more careful when it was a month.
But,
people freak out when it doesn't come, insane. 12 hours later. We're talking 3 weeks or a month.
Oh my God. That's what kills me. It's like, how do you not lose your mind? Like shipping something like that number one is not only illegal, and that it has to clear customs and all this other stuff, or you're going to have a very big problem on your hands. But then also they're in that box for a month. I freak out when my animal does not arrive at its intended destination by noon.
Well, I think
next day.
Fundamentally, and I love the book. All these things have a tremendous, place in my heart in their own way. I would say that certainly the way you feel about the animals that you ship is very different than the way Peter was feeling about what he shipped. Different. Okay, that's fundamentally true. So that's a big part of it, But I'm just saying that we can moderate our anxiety a little bit by saying I don't know. Peter was shipping stuff and it would take a month to get here and it was fine, or at least some percentage of it was fine. So maybe we can take a deep breath.
Right. Yeah. and that was that's what got him caught up on the one thing is that the one guy.
Right. He just didn't want to pay any more for it. Yeah. He just didn't want to pay the tax associated with the value of it. So he undervalued the shipment. And that's what tripped the whole thing up, which is how those things go. I mean, that's how that stuff falls apart.
Yeah.
Or just being done with it. Because I don't he wasn't, they hadn't talked through what it should look like, but also secondarily, it was just like, I'm not going to put another cent. I'm not going to throw good money after bad here into this venture. That's what causes the whole thing to actually go negatively, which isn't to say that Hank wouldn't have stiffed him for the entirety of the money, even if it went fine.
Right. God, it's just insanely fun. It's an insanely fun read, and it's a nice deep dive into some people, because I know that that Tom Crutchfield still has 100%. An active presence in the reptile community, and is seen favorable by a bunch of people. So I mean, it's a fun kind of a thing that kind of shows you how we got here with certain species, and also how we got here with, like I said earlier, like the relationship we have with certain things. I went through my old Reptiles magazine in '93,
whatever it was, Pan
that the feds ran trying to get people to
Pac
fight.
Rim,
Pac Rim, Pac Rim, I don't have it. The one that I have that I only go far back is '94. So I don't have any.
I'll have to look. I'll look, Owen, and then we'll see if we can take a little picture of it. Because I have some of that stuff, so we'll look.
Yeah. Please. Well, I like it because I mean I have I have the vivarium ads that talk about tiger carpets and all that other stuff. So I have it because that's.
This really is like the nexus,
that's
right?
Part of it and stuff like that.
So I'll bring us back. Cool. Let's break the fourth wall here a little bit. Where the heck is he?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, fair enough.
He's dead.
I was just gonna say
he's gone now.
What's that?
Yeah. No, he had some kind of work thing, and he's like, I'll be right there. And then he's like, I'll be there at 7:30, 7:40, 7:45. And I'm like, it's now
where's that kid with my latte?
He's not coming.
He's not coming, is he?
So, I don't know.
They go to pieces over nothing. Because this really is the nexus of herp history and the book review stuff. I mean, this more than anything, I suppose you could put the Lizard King in. And actually, so it turns out I'm like second degree separation from the author of that book. But to be honest, that book doesn't, but it doesn't appeal to me in the same way that this one does. And it's just the way it sits. And I think maybe it is the counts of volume. And yes, Owen, before you ask, I've reached out, I've asked about, let's do a show, let's talk about, at this point, I don't know, we'll see. But but the, in terms of, to me, this,
it happens.
Speaking honestly, this book has more appeal to me than that one, because that one's just focused on the real pure commercialization, whereas a lot of the people described in here, I think, have that sort of, I think it actually it's mentioned in the book, right? In the, well, and it might be in the Lizard King, but it's brought up in the context of some court case where they say essentially that, they have the sickness, right? It's all these people who love reptiles, and it causes these people to do things that, are against their better judgment or against sort of the rationality of a normal actor or whatever it might be.
It's these stories, I think, that speak to us. So, like, I know there was a case a couple years ago that stemmed from the leucistic boa constrictor.
Yeah.
And that whole crazy bullshit to get that thing into the country. And I remember reading every article I could on that one because it just kept getting more and more insane as that story kept going, where it's like apparently they shoved the boa into a fake belly that somebody wore, pretended to be pregnant. It's like, are you kidding? Like on a cruise ship. And it's like, oh my God. So this book is filled with a lot of those kinds of stories, which appeal to me.
Right.
It's not just that
the downside of that.
Many,
100%. I mean, the downside of that story to me is that because it's this mutation, it's about money. And even then, you can tell that there are people who maybe aren't being fully transparent in the sense, even of the local people, right? The local zoo from whom it was, quote, stolen, or whatever. And it's like, no, you got paid off. And then presumably, you could easily read, I should say, you could easily read that situation as like, oh, what does the person who's involved but wants to pass the buck say? They say, oh, well, don't pay attention to the money I got. It was stolen. This fits the narrative that's aligned with it and all this stuff, right? And I don't know that. I'm just saying, that's sort of how I had taken it, where it's like, again, to the point I know Dr. J made earlier, right, where it's like no honor amongst thieves, where it's just like, I don't know. I view all those things with a high degree of skepticism, where it's like, there's no clean. You know what I can promise you, Owen? There's no clean hands in that. Nobody could look themselves in the mirror on that one.
No, none. Not a single one. Well, and only, I think only by the grace of not wanting to indict several zoos did zoological facilities avoid going to court for several of these things that were going on in there. Because that one guy wanted to build cases against zoological facilities.
Owen, to a point you made earlier, right? Tom's old supervisor worked at San Diego in the 80s during this time. And certainly I can say, it definitely colored the way he viewed animal acquisition 20 years later. He's not there now. He's retired now and all this stuff, great guy. But, he was at San Diego when all that stuff went down. And it definitely 25 years later was impacting the way he viewed all this stuff.
Yeah, I think the black eye that several facilities got was deserved, and you have to change the way you do things, because you don't ever want to. You can't sit there on one leg and talk about conservation, and then on the other one be paying for have some guy just go and grab as many as he can.
I mean, it's all of it is morally ambiguous for sure.
It's nuts. It is, and it's the problem is that where do you draw the line with a lot of stuff? And obviously, where I draw the line on where I feel ethically comfortable is different than where you would draw the line, or somebody else would draw the line, or somebody from a different
right. That's
time,
sort of like
different
when
age,
you
different
read
upbringing
books
would
that are
draw the
about
line.
like
So,
sort of the
you know, we're
19th
all
century
like,
collectors, right,
yeah.
for the taxidermies and all this stuff, and we find it repulsive and horrifying. You know, all these sort of things also fascinating, right? You know, it's some combination. I think maybe that's the thing about this book, right? It's close enough to have to be able to reasonably apply most of our present context and understanding. It's not like, oh, it was 1875. Some, you know, Alfred Russel Wallace gets shipped to New Guinea to go shoot shit and, you know, send it back in casks of alcohol, you know, to be taxidermied.
Bring it back.
Yeah, you know, it's not that.
That looks
it's not
different
that
than the
degree
last
of differentiation.
one.
Instead,
Yeah.
we're looking at it saying, okay, this is close enough to be familiar, but it's obviously also different. You know, it's not. Again, our connection is only sort of tangential. It's, oh, I was sitting there to see this thing happen. For what it's worth, Owen, in case I don't think in the book that does it elaborate who Butterbean wanted to beat the crap out of for stiffing him? Okay, you want to know?
No, wait, I don't believe so.
I'm pretty sure
but
it's not in there. A
they
noted
might have.
ball
I don't think I
python
remember.
breeder, A1, Mr. Kevin McGurley. Kevin McGurley, that's correct.
What?
No,
why?
that was just that. So it's this
point
giant German guy who was impressively tattooed. He was literally tattooed. Well, there was some section that was covered, but I met this individual. He made a he made an impression, but he was tattooed, including the bottom of his feet, which is like super. You know, even Bruce, I don't think has tattoos on the bottom of his feet. Just because there's no place else left. You know? So like, you know, the insides of his hands and the bottoms of his feet. I guess. And yeah, so he struck an impression for sure. And I was principally seeing him in the context that's described here as saying, yes, he needed, I think, not even on behalf of himself, but on someone else's behalf, was going to, you know, beat up this ball python breeder who had stiffed him and then thought it was funny or whatever. Well, I can tell you that it was Kevin. And Kara was like, no, he can take him. You know, Kevin can defend himself against this man.
Kevin. Okay.
And I said, you are high if you think that's true. He will literally remove his skull from his spine.
Do you see this man? It's the drama of, you know, I want to believe that there's drama in other hobbies, but I just don't. I
don't know, man. I'm sure they get wild.
Getting all up in arms like the reptile keepers do. So I don't know. I must, but it's just. But that is insane. I mean, and you were at the Daytona that had the hurricane. And
I know Keith was there too. I had seen him there. You know, back then Keith was the you know, big scary Mr. McPeak. You know, and he doesn't remember that from my context at all. But
right, he posted up the picture today with his bull snake. I'm like, he never smiles like in these pictures with he's always so serious holding his reptiles. Right. Like, it's just like, be happy, Keith. But it's just weird. And that, I think that's part of the appeal from the book is it appeals to me, even though I was not at these situations because I came late in the game, but it appeals to me because it's almost based in my hometown. You guys were at a lot of these things.
There's still connections to these people. You can still friend Thomas Price on Facebook, right? The Benjamin Bucks of the book. Yeah. That's quite an alliteration. You know, you can friend him on Facebook, see what he's doing, you know? Yeah. Yeah, 100%. You
can go buy diamonds from Crutchfield. Yeah. Jesus. It's just nuts. And like I said, I do love these kinds of stories just to kind of remind us what we're doing. And I mean, at one point, the
no
animals had to get
moralizing,
here somehow.
you know.
So
Yeah, no, you know. I think that's sort of
I
a
would
fiction,
love to
right? Just
see.
because I mean, that's the
Yeah,
other part of
yeah,
it, right? I think either intrinsically you're okay with it or you're not, and
yeah,
that can be in manners of degree, where it's like, okay, I'm okay with the one pair, two pair sort of situation, not the 10,000, 100,000 thing.
hmm
But I mean, both those, the only in our instances, right? If you're working with wild caught stuff from
right,
another country, the only difference is that in that place they
hmm
view it as within their interest to authorize this to happen, and there's a tariff that's paid. And otherwise, the same thing, and maybe they're shipped a little bit better, right? Because it's not illicit. But
yeah,
otherwise, the same thing's happening. It's because someone has decided it's in their interest
hmm
to sign off on it. That's really the only difference. So you have to be either okay with it or not. You know, you're either bought in or
yeah.
you're
I
not.
think if the only reason, yeah, or not. Yeah, I almost feel like as keepers, we're automatically okay with the
Yeah.
two pair thing because I mean I have wild caught animals. I have several. I have produced them in my house in Pennsylvania, so I have gone to try to breed them to add to the captive born and bred
You're working on it.
population. I have not done that as much as I would like to have, but I have to be okay with it. Yeah, but I have to be okay with it because I have those wild caught animals. You know, I if I'm not okay with it, I'm a hypocrite. So, and I do I have shipments of do I have a giant freight of Madagascar hognose that I'm just going to take and
Yeah, I mean
sell?
that's the manners
No,
of
but
degree. I think you can be,
I,
you
I
know,
don't
you
know.
can
I
have
would see where that
you
would
can
kind of
be
be.
okay with
That
saying
would
two
be where my line
pairs
was.
different, or even,
Yeah,
you know, what
yeah.
all the non-amethystina scrubs, right? For years and years, the CITES quota was 50, right? Once they were described and accepted, then it became,
Mm-hmm.
you know, Tracy I was 50, Nauta was 50, Plastolepis was 50, all this stuff. Like 50, that's realistically probably, I mean, I'm confident that
Mm-hmm.
50 managed to accidentally die, you know, in ways that we don't even consider in an annual basis. Yeah, like, oh, some rock
Hey, if a
sheared off and
rock could
killed
hit it,
5
or
of them.
I'm
You
like,
know,
yeah,
okay,
there's
well,
a lot of
I
things will
guess
kill
that's
this animal. Yeah,
right, 100%. But versus an
lightning
unmanaged
strike,
number, or
12
even a
dead.
number
Yeah,
that
it's
is
fine.
managed
Yeah,
but is huge, and thus ostensibly represents a sort of reasonable harvest or whatever, but it's still a much
yeah,
different number. Like
yeah.
those you can say that's two different things. I just would suggest that like the difference between sort of illegal wild
Mm-hmm.
caught and legal wild caught, the only difference there is, you know, sort of government policy and somebody's signature. So you're either for that, you're either bought in or you're not, you know. And I think sometimes
Yeah,
the chondro community moralizing about
yeah.
Indonesian
I
law
mean,
for so long has been, I don't know. Frankly, it strikes me as a little bit like ethnicist or like national. It's sort of weird. It's like, oh, one of those Indonesians now.
well, I mean, they are looking at the animal. Nothing. All right. So it would be. I would be interested to see how many lines still like how far back does some stuff go. Like I know
But if it all
diamond
starts
python
from a
people
black
keep
box, I don't know that that
extensive
really
records when
helps,
it comes
man.
to lineage and stuff like that. How many lines go back directly to molt? I don't want to like that. That was my brain was like. So they're all coming from one guy in Australia to go to one guy in the U.S. who's
It's
distributing
really,
to
hey,
all the different
Owen,
zoos in the country.
it's really
Who I
weird
don't
how
like. I
all of
mean,
these what are
how big of a range?
theoretically distinct
Yeah,
lineages have had this same, you know, have had this same recessive gene pop up in them. Oh, it must be that it's some weird gene that isn't actually recessive. Or let's, you know, let's apply a little Occam's razor to this situation.
or
Or they're related.
yeah. Well, and that's the thing where it's like, so do you stop at
Uh-huh.
how many diamond lines stop at the zoo?
Would
All
it,
right, well,
and
where
then
did
the
the zoo
question
get it?
becomes,
If we were to
okay,
take
was the
another 2 steps,
1981
would
box
it just be
a different
molt?
pair
Like,
than the
would it just be
1982 box, and a pair went to Riverbanks, and a pair went to San Diego, and a pair went, you know, to Bronx and whatever?
exactly
Oh no, we have those are three different lines. No, actually, those were all the
right? And
1980 box, and maybe supplemented with a few extras from confiscations or what. You
but
know, that's
also
not to
then
say
it
it's
comes down to
entirely the same.
right, but were the animals But were the animals being
I
bred
think
in
some of
Australia
both.
and then being shipped over as
Some
babies,
of
or were
both.
they just collecting a bunch of diamond pythons in Australia from God knows
Yeah,
where?
yeah. Oh, 100%.
Okay, so then
It definitively it's
now it's a
definitely that.
clusterfuck.
No
Like,
question.
it's like I can't. Yeah. It's like you're just gonna keep running into the. But now what? Like it's just like if everything comes back to Hank Molt and everything goes back 100%. To Peter.
And the answer is it's going to be complicated, right? It's going to doubtless it is a mix. If you were just looking at something today that's San Diego versus Riverbanks versus whatever, but I don't know the whole Stardust thing. What is it? That's what it's called, right? Reduced pattern. Okay. Yeah. So the point would be that like
reduced pattern.
Definitely the whole notion that like, oh wow, there's something weird about this gene that it's popped up and all. Okay. Do you hear yourself talking? Because if you do, and you can look at this with the rationality as opposed to sort of our rose-colored glasses where we view everything optimistically and say like, Nick always points this out, right? People tend to view things that don't make sense through the lens most favorable to them, even if that's the least likely possibility. He's totally right. And that's definitely what we see with that one, because it's like this isn't even complicated.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. It's like you said, Occam's razor. It's if you looked at any other species, if I explained to you that this happened with ball pythons from this, and this, what would you say?
There's at least one common ancestor that's common across those lineages.
Came from some animal
100%.
from some place. There's some connection. Yeah. Right. You would say there's some connection, but instead they're just like, no, well, okay. Like it is just all right. So it's the thing of like, how did Jags end up in Australia?
Just throwing it out a possible alternative.
Or let's maybe one end. Just.
I mean, this is pretty crazy, but bear with me for a second.
Somebody's hands down there. Just throwing it out there, which is, it's mathematically probably more likely that this happened. So, but that's where we're at. I think we're coming up to about an hour 30. So I don't know where he is at, but I think we can wrap it up now because we did talk a little bit, Justin and I, before I cut out and cut back in. So do you have any other?
I think we've gotten into a lot of it. It is something that I would recommend to people interested in the history of herpetoculture. I think, to my mind, it's the most interesting book in that vein. Really, almost the only one, because to me, the Lizard King is so hyper specific on sort of that really mass commercial Central America, South America stuff that they just read very differently and strike me very differently. So to me, it's kind of a one of one. And if you are interested in history of herpetoculture stuff, I think it's a must purchase. I'm sure it's available used now for nothing effectively, right?
I mean, I want to say mine is mine was a retired library book or something like that. I think I got it for like under $10, and it was just like I knew it came out. I've seen it all over the place. It's really obvious with its bright yellow freaking cover, but it's just like, and I'm like, I never got this, so I bought this. I think I bought this around Christmas time for myself. And when Eric's like, "Now you pick the book," I'm like, I have that book over there that I've been meaning to read, and I'm glad I picked this one instead of like the book.
Well, to your point, I was always surprised that you hadn't read it, and I think it's because maybe it's a slow starting thing, or it seems a little bit off, or whatever. But again, if you have an interest in herpetoculture, I think people will find the book super of interest, and all the more so from being able to connect it to characters that are still around or, recently departed, as Justin pointed out with Peter and all that, So yeah, I mean, it's, I don't know. I would recommend it. I think it's super fun. I've definitely read it a handful of times. I read it in a day or two when it had first come out, and I've since read it another time or two, just every so often, just to sort of remember the fun. I do think it's meant to be read as fun. Yeah.
Brush it up. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would say if you're definitely somebody who's into Australian species, um, even then, just not
Yeah.
just Australian species, just
Yeah,
because they
man.
went into like Dominican red mountain,
That was
but
the front
like
end
they
of the
went through
red.
my
Yeah,
goddamn
I
herpiculture
forgot about
like
that, right?
life,
You
and
know,
we're like,
relative
well,
to your
this is
own
what happened with this animal. I
foray
went,
into
damn
that,
it.
into boas, you know, those boas in particular. Yeah, I mean, it really goes into that in a way, you know, really
Yeah.
bringing it sort of to a
Yeah.
modern audience. Yeah.
Yeah. So weird. Yeah, it's so weird. I mean, and also if you're if you're even in my area, if you are a reptile keeper in Pennsylvania, I mean, this is more so our history than a lot of other stuff. I mean, it's really cool. I really enjoyed it. It was a really fun book, and I would say that it's like a must read. And like I said, it's not that hard of a read. You can blow through it. The only thing that kept me from finishing it was work because apparently I have to do my job to get paid. So, but I was able to knock it out in I think a couple days, just reading on and off. But it was it was awesome. It was fun, and like I said, you'll be banging your head against the desk after like several chapters, being like, "Why did you do that?" And just watching the hilarity of this
Yeah.
all. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Justin and I were talking about the field tag rattlesnake that they listed on Kingsnake, and it's like they mentioned kingsnake.com, and like, and that's your education. Like things will hit close to your herpetological experience in one way or another, and it's like that's what I liked about this book
Yeah.
is it very much it showed me that, that we're not as far as
100%.
removed from the days of smuggling as we like to think we are sometimes. So very cool book. So got anything going on,
It's
Rob? You want
okay.
to throw
Have
out there
some
to the
rhino
people,
eggs.
or
Should have a litter
what's
of
cooking? How's your
Puerto Rican
season going?
boas, and that's about it. Trying to be low key, man. We're just super busy in general. We're getting ready to go to Arizona here in a bit,
Nice.
and that'll be super fun. So yeah, I don't know, the usual.
Yeah. I'm not super jealous that now this is like the second trip you guys get to go on without me, and then you guys are going to go to Australia
Yeah.
in October without me. So like this doesn't hurt me at all. So yeah, horrible pain that is inflicted upon me, but that'll be fun.
Yeah, I mean that
I don't
first
know,
one was just
I'm
super
hoping my
early. I
rhinos
mean,
good
they
this
had
year, but
developed
I'm not
follicles
sure.
last year, but I didn't
So
pair them
we'll see.
because they were, grow outs that I wanted to give another year. And so I think that sort of distorted their time frame. It was super early for me, and it seems early relative to the rest of the ones that I have. But as I said, I opened it, didn't expect to see them, and was like, oh, okay, cool. But yeah, so pretty light here. It sounds like you're going to be super busy.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, I just got a clutch of corn snakes. And then I think I have four more potential python clutches, maybe. And then I'm
That's
still
awesome,
waiting
man.
on the rhinos and another clutch of corn snakes. So, yep. Well, yep. It's one of those moments where I get to walk around my
Nice.
house saying that I didn't breed
Your
enough.
usual process.
And then next month I get to walk around and say I bred too much. So
I have a process.
but we'll see how it goes. Yeah, it's how it works. it's my process, but that process just let it happen. So, all right. One last time, it is Stolen World is the book, and it is highly recommended by myself and several high-ranking cryptological people like Rob, Justin, and Eric. So definitely a good book. Go ahead and grab it, and let us know what you think about it. And we'll pick out another book for the next one. I think it's going to be either Eric's turn or we're going to be changing it out to the Patreon to have them pick the next book for the book club. So more on that when Eric reemerges, if he ever does. So we'll see about that. Next week, I know we're going to be talking with Mike Curtin later on this week, and that'll probably be the show for after this one. Talking to him about his ocelots, Russian red tigers, what he's got going on. I know he's got Macklot's python eggs. I know he's got Argentine boas.
He'll have some rhino. He said he's going to have some rhino rat snakes, and he got from one that I sent to him.
The white-sided black rat snakes as well. The rhino eggs, yeah, I saw his. Yeah, I saw his rhino. He was he inspected my rhinos after I got them.
Yeah, 100%. I need to give him a call, actually.
Wanted those, so I'm glad that he's having success as well now too. So that'll be cool.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. He's probably rhino questions, probably, but there we go. I reminded you on that one. So that'll be happening then, and then I'm not sure what Erica is scheduled later. I should though, because I think he sent me a schedule, but I didn't read it. So it's here nor there. We'll figure it out. That's all everybody has tonight. But if you have any questions, go ahead and send it to info@MoreliaPythonRadio.com. Go ahead and follow us on the Patreon. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Morelia Python Radio on all those different platforms. And make sure you, when you do sign up for the Patreon, you do it on the inland level, because then you'll get invited to the monthly private shows with just me, Eric, Riley, Lucas. Sometimes Rob come by, sometimes other people come by. It's fun. Also go to the Teespring store. We got a bunch of new stuff going on over there. Morelia Python Radio merch. New thing right now is stickers of MPR show logos that you can slap on cups, books, computers, anything you want. And we're working on some other stuff, t-shirts and things like that. I know that I was going to try to bug Mr. Stone on fun quotes throughout the history of MPR that I could slap on t-shirts. I have several in mind that I'm going to run by people, but the one recently that I really like is Carpondro, ? Did you eat glue as a child? Like, that's probably one that I'm going to put on a t-shirt somehow. So, but yeah, that's all we have for everybody tonight. So we'll say thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch everybody back here next week for some more Morelia Python Radio. Good night.